Look, Social Security was invented in a country where the average life expectancy was 61 years old, the retirement age was 65. The math was not accidental. The system was designed at the architectural level to collect more than it paid out. That was the whole point. That was the feature, not the bug. Then something changed. People started living longer. The ratio of workers to retirees started shrinking. The math stopped working. And instead of fixing the math, every administration for the last 40 years just kind of handed the problem to the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy is you. Meanwhile, pensions disappeared, home prices in major cities increased by over 300% in 20 years, while wages grew by maybe 40% if you were lucky. College tuition tripled. Employer contributions to retirement shrank. Credit card debt among people under 35 is at an all-time high, and the median net worth of someone under 40 is somewhere around $10,000. $10,000, that's one car repair away from zero. And the advice? The advice is still contribute to your 401k and be patient. Patient for what exactly? We're going to explain how the retirement system actually works, why it was never built for you, and why Gen Z is the last generation that will fund a machine they'll never collect from. And more importantly, we're going to talk about what the people who understand this are actually doing instead. Because here's the thing. Every broken system creates an arbitrage opportunity for someone, and in this case, that someone might as well be you. The metaphor I want to use for this entire video is a vending machine. Stay with me. The social contract around money, work, and retirement is basically a vending machine. You put coins in your whole life, taxes, contributions, payroll deductions, all of it, and the promise is that when you're old and tired, the vending machine dispenses something back. Security. A pension. Some combination of benefits that makes the last chapter of your life survivable without humiliating yourself in front of your children. That was the deal. That's what the vending machine was supposed to do. The problem is the vending machine is broken. And not broken in the way where it gives you the wrong snack. Broken in the way where it takes your money, shows you the item moving toward the flap, and then the coil just stops. You press B7 again. Nothing. You shake it a little. Still nothing. And there's a sign on the machine that says, "Please be patient, the item will arrive eventually." But the sign was put there by someone who already ate. The people who designed the vending machine ate. The people who used it in its prime ate. And now you're standing in front of a machine with broken mechanics, a depleting inventory, and someone behind you saying, "That's just how machines work. Stop complaining." That's the framing. Let's actually get into the numbers. Social Security at the current trajectory will have depleted its trust fund reserves by approximately 2033. That's 7 years from now. When that happens, the program doesn't disappear. It just cuts benefits by roughly 23% because it can only pay out what it collects each year. Gen Z workers right now are in their early to mid-20s. In 2033, they'll be in their late 30s, still putting money in, still watching it go to current retirees. And when they eventually reach retirement age, either the benefits will have been restructured, the retirement age will have moved, or both. Because that's what always happens when the math breaks. They adjust the machine instead of fixing it. Now you might be thinking, okay, but politicians will fix it before that. To be fair, that's possible. They might. But the fixes on the table are either raise taxes, which means you pay more in, or raise the retirement age, which means you collect later. There's also cut benefits, which means you collect less. Every single solution involves you getting a worse deal than the people who came before you. The machine is broken and all the repair options make it worse for you specifically. That's not politics. That's arithmetic. Let's go deeper. The vending machine was designed around a specific worker to retiree ratio. In 1950, there were roughly 16 workers for every one retiree. The math was comfortable. Almost embarrassingly generous if you were a retiree in 1950. By 2000, that ratio had dropped to about 3.5 workers per retiree. Today, it's hovering around 2.7. By 2035, some projections put it below 2. 2 workers supporting one retiree, while those 2 workers also pay rent, pay their own health care, service their student debt, and somehow try to build wealth in a market where asset prices have already been inflated by the generation ahead of them. The machine didn't break because people are lazy or irresponsible. The machine broke because it was designed for a demographic structure that no longer exists. Lower birth rates, longer lifespans, earlier retirement promises that couldn't be walked back. It's a structural failure wearing the costume of a personal finance problem. And this matters because when you understand the actual structure, you stop trying to optimize your behavior inside a broken system and start asking whether you should be using a different machine altogether. Here's the first thing most people get wrong about this. They think the problem is Social Security. Social Security is just the most obvious symptom. The real problem is the entire architecture of mid-20th century wealth building, which was built on three pillars: a stable long-term job with a pension, affordable home ownership that appreciates steadily, and a social safety net that catches you if the first two fail. All three of those pillars have been progressively hollowed out over the last 40 years, and what replaced them was mostly just debt instruments dressed up as opportunity. The pension became a 401k, which sounds like an upgrade but is actually a transfer of risk. With a pension, the employer takes the investment risk. With a 401k, you take the investment risk. You also take the responsibility for managing it, which most people are completely unprepared to do. So what happens? Most people either don't contribute enough, or they panic sell when markets drop, or they pick the default fund that charges high fees. The median 401k balance for someone in their 50s is around $60,000. $60,000, that is not retirement money. That's a gap year. Then there's housing. Let me give you the concrete version of this. In 2001, the median home price in the United States was about $170,000. The median household income was about $42,000. So the price-to-income ratio was roughly 4-to-1, uncomfortable but manageable with a normal mortgage. In 2026, the median home price is around $420,000. The median household income is around $80,000. The ratio is now over 5-to-1, but it gets worse when you factor in interest rates. At 7% on a $420,000 mortgage, your monthly payment is somewhere around $2,800. That's before property taxes, insurance, or the fact that the roof will eventually need replacing. A household earning $80,000 gross is taking home maybe $5,500 a month after taxes and health insurance. $2,800 of that is the mortgage. That leaves $2,700 for everything else: food, transportation, childcare, student loans, retirement contributions. Everything. And that's if you can even get the mortgage. You need the down payment first. 20% on $420,000 is $84,000. The average Gen Z person has a net worth of around $10,000. You are not saving your way to $84,000 while paying $2,000 a month in rent. The math does not work. You are not failing because of avocado toast. The math literally does not work. This is what I mean when I say the vending machine is broken. It's not that the buttons don't work, it's that the items it's supposed to dispense aren't actually in there anymore. Someone came and cleared out the inventory and left the machine running. Let me show you where the inventory went. Between 2010 and 2023, institutional investors and large private equity firms purchased an estimated 3 to 5 million single-family homes in the United States. Blackstone alone, through its various vehicles, owns enough residential real estate to house a small city. These are not homes someone is living in while building equity. These are financial instruments wearing the disguise of neighborhoods. They were purchased specifically because the return on residential real estate, especially in supply-constrained markets, reliably outpaces inflation and generates consistent rental yield. The machine was supposed to dispense homeownership as a wealth-building tool for working people. Instead, the asset class got financialized. The homes became the inventory of a different, more sophisticated machine, and regular people got priced out. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting I mean structurally depressing but also kind of clarifying. If you're an institution with a $10 billion allocation to residential real estate, you're not doing anything wrong. You're responding to incentives. The tax code makes it advantageous. The financing is available. The returns are reliable. You would be failing your investors if you didn't. This is not a villain story, it's an incentive story. And understanding it as an incentive story is the only way to figure out what to actually do about it. Because here's the thing about broken machines. Someone always knows they're broken before everyone else does. And the people who know first are not the people standing in line waiting for their snack. They're the people who stopped using that machine and built something else. If you find this useful, subscribe. I'm going to keep making videos that explain how these systems actually work and what the people who are winning inside them are actually doing. It's free, it takes 2 seconds, and frankly, if this hasn't made you curious enough to stick around, I'm not sure what will. Let's talk about the psychological layer of this, because the mechanics are important, but they're not the whole story. There's a concept in behavioral economics called status quo bias. People tend to prefer the current state of affairs over alternatives, even when the alternatives are objectively better. Change feels risky even when staying is the actual risk. And this bias has been weaponized, maybe not intentionally but functionally, by the entire financial advice industry. The message for decades has been, contribute to your 401k, buy a home when you can, diversify, be patient, trust the process. And for about 30 years, from roughly 1983 to 2013, that advice was actually correct. If you followed it, you got rich. Not because the advice was brilliant, but because you were operating in a period of historically low interest rates, demographic tailwinds from the baby boom, an expanding middle class with increasing purchasing power, and a global economy that was absorbing American goods and dollars at a rate that made everything go up. The advice wasn't wisdom, it was timing. The machine was working, so anyone who used it correctly came out fine. But now people who came out fine are giving that exact same advice to a generation operating in completely different structural conditions, as if the advice has some timeless property it never actually had. It's like teaching someone to drive using footage from an empty road and then sending them into rush hour traffic with the same instructions. Just follow the lanes. It worked for me. Here's the second thing most people get wrong. They think they're being told bad advice by malicious people. They're not. They're being told advice that worked by people who believe it still works because it worked for them. The failure is epistemic, not intentional. Nobody's lying. The machine just changed. And the people who last successfully used it don't know it changed because they already got their snack. Let's get into something that most people in this space will not say directly. Social Security in its current form is a transfer payment from younger workers to older retirees. That is the mechanism, that is how it works. You pay payroll taxes, those taxes go into a fund, and that fund is used to pay current retirees. It is not an investment account. It is not accruing interest in your name. It is not a forced savings program. It is a transfer. You are paying for someone else's retirement on the promise that someone else will pay for yours. That promise made sense when the demographics supported it. It doesn't anymore. And here's the part that makes this particularly sharp. The political class knows this. They've known it for a long time. The Social Security trustees release a report every single year that projects exactly when the fund runs out, exactly what the projected shortfall is, and exactly what range of changes would fix it. This is not hidden information. The information is public, updated annually, and extremely precise. Nothing substantive has been done, because doing something substantive means either raising taxes on people who vote at high rates, or cutting benefits to people who vote at high rates, or raising the retirement age for people who vote at high rates. Every fix hurts a constituency that actually shows up on election day. Gen Z votes at roughly 35 to 40% turnout in presidential elections, and significantly lower in midterms. The math of democratic politics is not complicated here. The machine stays broken because fixing it costs more votes than leaving it broken. Here is the third thing most people get wrong, and this one is the most counterintuitive. They think the problem is that young people aren't saving enough. The problem is not savings rate. The problem is the return on saving. When your parents were in their 20s, a savings account paid 5 or 6% interest, a bond yielded 8 or 9%. You could literally park money in low-risk instruments and have it double every 8 to 10 years without taking significant risk. The math of compounding worked even if you were conservative. You didn't have to be a sophisticated investor to build wealth. You just had to not be stupid. Then interest rates spent about 15 years near zero. A savings account returned nothing. A bond returned almost nothing. If you wanted any return at all, you had to take equity risk, which means the entire population of savers was pushed into the stock market whether they wanted to be or not. And the stock market responded by going up, which made existing asset holders wealthier, which widened the wealth gap, which made it harder for people without existing assets to get started. The whole thing is one long second-order effect. Now rates are higher, but the assets are also more expensive, so the people who bought cheap assets when rates were low are now sitting on massive gains. The people trying to enter now have to pay high prices at high rates. The window between assets were cheap and rates were low was roughly 2013 to 2021. If you were financially active in that window, you probably did very well. If you were a teenager in that window, you missed it. Not because you were irresponsible, because you were 15. Here's a short scenario that makes this concrete. Imagine two people. Call them Marcus and Jordan. Same city, same type of job, same general level of financial literacy. Marcus buys a house in 2015. The price is $260,000. His rate is 3.8%. His monthly payment is about $1,210. By 2026, that house is worth $450,000. Marcus has approximately $190,000 in equity, plus he's been paying a mortgage that's actually lower than current rents for a one-bedroom in most major cities. Jordan tries to buy the same type of house in 22,000. The rate is 6.9%. The monthly payment is about $2,760. Jordan needs to earn significantly more just to qualify. And even if Jordan qualifies, he's paying more than twice the monthly cost for a house that's already inflated. For Jordan to see the same percentage appreciation Marcus saw, the house would need to hit somewhere around $720,000. Same city, same job type, different timing. $190,000 of difference in net worth, generated not by discipline or intelligence or effort, but by entering the machine at different points in its cycle. That's not unfair in a moral sense. The machine doesn't have opinions. It just rewards people who buy in early and punishes people who buy in late. The question is, what do you do if you're Jordan? And the honest answer is you probably don't buy that house. You find a different machine. Let me do a quick comedic pause here because this is getting bleak. Imagine being 22, fresh out of college, $80,000 in student debt, making $52,000 a year, and your uncle at Thanksgiving says you just need to stop buying things you don't need and save up for a down payment. The man bought his house in 1994 for $112,000 and has been telling you about compound interest since you were 9. Sir, please. The compound interest is how you got rich. The lack of compoundable assets is exactly the problem. Okay, back to the systems. So we have a broken social contract around retirement. We have a broken architecture around homeownership. What else? Let's talk about the labor market, because this one is genuinely underappreciated. The employer-employee relationship in the mid-20th century was built on a specific implicit set of incentives. You stay loyal, work hard, move up, and the company takes care of you. This included pensions, healthcare tied to employment, seniority-based pay increases, and the realistic expectation of spending 30 years at the same company and retiring with a ceremony and a watch. That system started breaking apart in the 1980s. Shareholder primacy became the dominant corporate philosophy. The obligation shifted from employees to shareholders. Layoffs became a financial strategy, not a last resort. Wages were suppressed where possible. Benefits were cut or converted to employee-funded alternatives. And the pension, which was an employer liability, got replaced by the 401k, which is an employee asset because from an accounting perspective, removing pension obligations made balance sheets look better. The people making these decisions weren't evil. They were responding to incentives. Shareholder value metrics rewarded cost-cutting. Executive compensation was tied to stock performance. The incentive was to reduce labor costs. So labor costs got reduced, the vending machine got restocked with cheaper items. Now here's the current version of this. A lot of the narrative around Gen Z and work is framed as Gen Z being lazy or having unrealistic expectations or not being willing to pay their dues. I'm going to push back on that, not because I think work ethic is irrelevant, but because the framing misses the actual incentive structure. The deal your grandparents were offered was sacrifice your 20s and 30s, accept low pay while you're junior, be loyal, put in the hours, and the organization will take care of you. That deal had math behind it. If the organization was going to give you a pension and career stability and healthcare and a defined benefit for the rest of your life, then accepting lower pay in your early years was a reasonable trade. The backloaded compensation structure made sense. Gen Z is being asked to accept the same front-end sacrifice, the low pay, the dues paying, the long hours, without the back-end guarantee, because the back-end no longer exists. There's no pension, job security is an illusion, most Gen Z workers will change employers multiple times. The loyalty premium has been eliminated from one side of the equation, so declining to pay it makes complete rational sense. You think the problem is Gen Z doesn't want to work. The actual problem is Gen Z understands, maybe instinctively rather than analytically, that the terms of the original deal have changed and the new terms aren't worth the same price. This is not laziness. This is rational contract renegotiation. Now here is where this gets actually useful. Because I'm not here to make you feel bad about the system. I'm here to talk about what you can actually do inside of it. There are, broadly speaking, 4 traps that most people fall into when they realize the traditional path isn't going to work for them. The first trap is avoidance. You understand that the system is broken, you get angry or depressed about it, and you stop engaging financially altogether. No investing, no planning, just spending whatever you have, because what's the point? This is the most expensive response to a broken system, because it guarantees the worst outcome. The second trap is the hustle fantasy. You see the traditional path is broken, and you replace it with the dream of a business that makes you rich. In 18 months, you buy courses, you start and stop multiple side projects, you optimize your morning routine. None of it compounds because you're not actually building anything, you're sampling the idea of building things. The vending machine is broken, and your response is to keep trying different buttons faster. The third trap is the rage bait rabbit hole. You get really good at understanding how broken the system is, you consume a lot of content about it, you become very articulate at explaining why everything is rigged, and then you do absolutely nothing about your financial situation. Because explaining the problem feels like progress. It is not progress. Understanding that the machine is broken does not fix your finances. It's just a more intellectually satisfying way to stand in front of the machine. The fourth trap is cargo cult optimization. You do all the right surface level things because that's what successful people appear to do. You open a brokerage account, you buy index funds, you read books about money, but you're doing it without understanding the underlying mechanics, which means you can't adapt when conditions change. You're not building financial intelligence, you're performing it. The people who actually navigate a broken system don't avoid it, don't fantasize past it, don't rage at it, and don't cosplay inside it. They find the parts of it that still work, use those, and build parallel structures outside of it for the parts that don't. Let me make this concrete. The 401k is broken at the macro level. At the individual level, if your employer matches contributions, that is a 100% instant return on that portion of your money. No investment in any market gives you a 100% return the moment you enter it. You use it, you use the match. That part of the machine still works, but you don't stop there and assume the machine will do the rest. Social Security is broken at the structural level. At the individual level, you still pay in because you have no choice, but you plan as if you will never collect it. If you collect something, it's a bonus. If you don't, you're not surprised and you're not dependent. You build your retirement math without it. Homeownership is broken as a starter strategy in high-cost markets. But property as an investment vehicle is not broken. The people who figured this out are not buying $350,000 condos to live in. They're finding markets where the price-to-rent ratio still works, buying income-generating properties, and having someone else pay the mortgage while the asset appreciates. The tool isn't broken. The way most people are taught to use it is broken. Here is the underlying principle. The vending machine dispenses certain things for certain people at certain times. When it stops dispensing, you don't stand there pressing the same buttons. You look at what the machine is built from, and you ask whether any of those components can be reconfigured to work for you. Sometimes they can. And sometimes you walk away and find a different machine. Let's talk about what the different machine looks like, because this is where I want to be specific rather than vague. The old machine had 3 parts: stable employment, appreciating assets, and a safety net. The new version of those 3 things, for someone who understands the current structure, looks something like this. Stable income does not come from one employer. It comes from a diversified set of income streams where the loss of any single one is not catastrophic. This could be employment plus a productized service plus passive income from an asset. It could be multiple clients as a freelancer or contractor. The form varies. The principle is the same. Concentrated income dependence is the new pension risk. Appreciating assets are still available. The stock market, for all its volatility, has compounded at roughly 9 to 10% annually over any long period. If you invest $300 a month starting at 22 and never increase that amount, you have approximately $900,000 at 65. That math still works. What's changed is that you can't rely on the market alone because you also need real estate exposure, and you can't afford that through traditional homeownership in most cities. So you find the accessible version: REITs, house hacking, buying in secondary markets, real estate syndications. Not because these are exotic strategies, because they're the updated version of own something that goes up. The safety net you can't rely on the government to provide, so you build it privately. Emergency fund, term life insurance if you have dependents, disability coverage, enough liquidity to survive 6 to 12 months without income. Not because you're paranoid, because you understand that the public safety net is demographically stressed and politically complicated, and the only guaranteed safety net is the one you control. None of this is revolutionary. All of it is just the same underlying principles applied to the current structural reality instead of a structural reality that no longer exists. Let me do the second comedic moment. You know what's funny? There are entire financial influencer accounts right now posting content that is word for word indistinguishable from advice published in 1987. Maximize your 401k, buy a house as soon as possible, build an emergency fund of 3 months' expenses, 3 months. In an economy where a single medical event can cost $40,000 out of pocket and layoffs come with 2 weeks' notice, 3 months. Okay, the advice isn't wrong in principle. It's wrong in calibration. It's a watch that was accurate 30 years ago and hasn't been adjusted since. Now let me go somewhere that most videos in this space don't actually go, because it requires making a claim that sounds pessimistic, but is actually the most practically useful thing I can say. Gen Z is not going to fix the systems that are broken, not because they can't or won't try, but because the incentive structure of democratic politics makes structural reform of these specific issues nearly impossible on any timeline that matters for Gen Z's financial planning. The people who benefit from the current structure are the people who vote most consistently. The changes required would disproportionately affect current beneficiaries. The math of electoral politics makes this intractable in the short and medium term. So the useful frame is not how do we fix the system. The useful frame is, given that this system will remain broken for the foreseeable future, how do I build wealth in parallel to it rather than through it? The historical parallel I find most instructive here is the informal economy. In countries where official institutions are unreliable or corrupt, people don't stop building wealth. They find alternative mechanisms, they build trust networks, they create savings circles, they use assets that aren't tied to institutional promises, they find the value exchange that doesn't require the broken machine to function. They build a different vending machine, and some of them do remarkably well, not because they're exceptional, but because they're honest about what machine they're actually operating in. Gen Z is in a version of that position. Not as extreme, the institutions still partially function, but the contract has changed enough that treating them with full faith the way previous generations reasonably could is now a strategic mistake. The smart move is partial engagement with the existing system where it still delivers value and active construction of parallel structures where it doesn't. This is not cynicism, this is calibration. Here's the summary version of everything I've said because I think it's useful to bring it back to the vending machine one more time. The vending machine still has some items in it. The 401k employer match is in there. Tax-advantaged accounts are in there. The compounding math of equity investing is in there. Certain geographic real estate markets are in there. High-income skills that let you build diversified revenue are in there. These buttons still work. Press them. The empty slots are the ones that previous generations relied on. The pension slot is empty. The guaranteed appreciation slot is empty in most major markets. The stay loyal and you'll be taken care of slot is empty. The Social Security slot is either empty or significantly depleted depending on when you try to use it. Stop pressing those buttons. And then there are the new buttons, the ones that didn't exist when the machine was built. Digital assets, not as speculation, but as a technological infrastructure that's producing real economic value and real returns for early holders who understood what they were buying. Online income mechanisms that scale without proportional labor input. Fractional ownership of assets that were previously only accessible at institutional scale. Geographic arbitrage opportunities created by remote work. These buttons are new. The machine was not designed for them. But the machine doesn't care. If the button works, it works. The 3 things I want you to actually take from this. First, stop planning your financial life around systems that were designed for a demographic and economic context that no longer exists. Social Security is not your retirement plan. A single employer is not your income security. Homeownership in an unaffordable market is not your wealth building strategy. These are not moral failures. They are structural obsolescences. Map what actually works now. Second, the wealth gap between people who understood this in 2015 and people who understand it in 2026 is already large. The wealth gap between people who understand it now and people who figure it out in 2035 will be larger. The compounding advantage of understanding this early is the same compounding math that works in investing. Earlier is better. Not perfect, just earlier. You don't need to be sophisticated. You need to start. Third, your income is the most powerful variable you control right now, not your expenses, your income. The advice to cut lattes is an insult dressed up as wisdom. A 22-year-old with a $50,000 salary who doubles their income over 5 years will retire with more money than a 22-year-old with a $50,000 salary who cuts expenses aggressively for 5 years. Income scales. Cutting doesn't scale. Build skills that are scarce, solve problems that are expensive, and get paid proportionally. The vending machine doesn't care how frugal you are. It only accepts certain currencies. Make the currencies it accepts. We started with a machine that was designed to not pay out, a retirement age set above life expectancy, a system built on demographic assumptions that dissolved decades ago, a promise that made sense when the math worked and became an obligation when it didn't. Handed forward until it landed on a generation that's been paying in their whole working lives while the fund ran down and the politicians negotiated around the edges. That's where we are. That's the machine. The question isn't whether it's fair. Machines don't do fair. The question is whether you're going to stand in front of it pressing the same empty slots, because that's what someone told you worked. Or whether you're going to figure out which buttons still dispense something and build a backup system for the ones that don't. I'd subscribe this isn't going to get less complicated.